Okay, for 2A, it says find the intercepts, and we're given this one here, and it says use any method. So use any method means that you can use any of the methods we talked about in the lecture notes. So the first one was factoring, and then there's also the square root property, and then we also have quadratic formula. So you should be able to know how to do all three of those, because depending on which one that you have, one of those methods might be more advantageous than others. So it's good for you to know how to do all three of those for solving. So this one, let's start out by doing the intercepts. If we do x-intercept, that means that we want to put in a 0 for y. That's always the rule for doing that. So if we put a 0 in for the y, we get 0 equals 6x squared minus 11x minus 10. Okay, so with it in this form, we now need to solve this equation. So quadratic set equal to 0, again, there's those three different methods that we're going to use. So first thing you should always try to do is factoring. And so I talked about different factoring methods in the lecture notes. So on the answer key here, I did the bottoms up method with factoring, but for this video I want to show you a different method. I'm going to show you the grouping method, which some of you might be more familiar with. Now, grouping method, the way it works is you take the first number and multiply it by the last number, and we get negative 60. Then we're going to look for two numbers that multiply to make negative 60, but then they add up to negative 11. So we want to run down the different lists for that. We've got 2 and 30, no, that's not going to work. 3 and 20, that won't add up to give 11. And then we got 4 and 15. That one will give us a combination of 11. The last number here is negative, so I know one of these numbers has to be negative. And so therefore I have to make the 15 negative. So then I'm just going to rewrite the middle term. Instead of negative 11x, I'm going to rewrite it with these two terms here. Doesn't matter which one comes first. So let's just do 6x squared minus 15x plus 4x minus 10. So again, the order really doesn't make a difference here. Once we have it written out like this, we're going to factor the first two terms and the second two terms separately. So for the first two terms, with the 6 and 15, I know I have a 3 that's common in there, and an x is also common, and I would get there a 2x minus 5, and I would get that part. So next, we're going to do factoring with the second two. A 4x and a 10, you can factor out a 2. So if you factor out a 2 there, then we'll get 2x minus 5. If you did the factoring correctly and it does factor, you should always get these two parentheses should be the same. That's a common factor that we're going to pull out. So we're going to factor out a 2x minus 5. So if we get rid of the 2x minus 5s, what we have left over is 3x plus 2. And so now we're going to set both of those equal to 0 separately to get our answers. We'll get 5/2, and we'll get negative 2/3 if we set both those equal to 0. So those would be considered the x-intercepts. Now let's take a look at the y-intercept. Y-intercept, you're always going to solve it by letting x equal 0. So we'll put that into the original one, 0 in there for all the x's. And then if we simplify that, we'll get negative 10. So x-intercepts would be these two here, and a negative 10 would be your y-intercept.